Okay, let's talk about a word you hear thrown around all the time. Globalization. It sounds huge, right? Super complex, maybe even a little intimidating. But what if, at its heart, it's actually just a story about connections? Let's see if we can unravel it together.
So, I've got to ask you this riddle. What could a call center worker in India, a kid's bicycle, and a woman landing her very first job possibly have in common? It might sound random, but the answer, well, it's not just some trivia question. It actually gets to the very core of how our world works right now. Let's meet the real people behind this little puzzle.
All right, first up, we've got Janardhan over in India. Now, every single night, he basically becomes John. He's on the phone, providing customer service to people in the United States, people he's never going to meet, working on a time zone that's completely flipped from his own. That right there, that's the globalization of services in a nutshell.
Then there's Ramtari. He's buying his daughter a new bicycle for her birthday. And it's a great bike. It's affordable, it's well-made. Why? Because it was built in China, but sold right there in India. You see? It seems like such a simple purchase, but it's actually a tiny endpoint of a massive global supply chain.
And last but not least, meet Sarika. She's what we call a first-generation learner, the first woman in her whole family to get a college degree. And because of that, she's got career options that her mother's generation could have only dreamed of. Now, this does cause a little bit of friction with some of the older traditional values, but our whole new path is being powered by a global flow of ideas about what's possible.
So you have a service job, a bicycle, and a brand new career path. They seem so different, but they're all threads in this giant tapestry we call globalization. Each one is a story about movement, about stuff flowing across the entire planet. So let's get down to it. What exactly is this thing?
Okay, if there's one word you need to remember, it's flows. Just think of it like these invisible rivers or currents crisscrossing the globe. And they're carrying everything with them, creating this massive web of, well, worldwide interconnectedness. It's this web that connects all of our lives, usually in ways we don't even notice.
And these flows aren't just one thing. We can actually break them down into 4 main categories. You've got the flow of ideas, the flow of capital, that's money, the flow of commodities, physical stuff, and finally, the flow of people. Each one is a critical piece of the globalization puzzle.
Now you might be thinking, hang on, people have always traded with each other. They've always moved around. And you'd be right. So what makes today so different? What's the engine that took this old idea and just slammed the pedal to the metal, putting it all into hyperdrive?
Well, the answer, in a single word, is technology. I mean, sure, these flows have been happening for centuries, but it's inventions like the telegraph, then the telephone, and now the microchip that have completely revolutionized everything. They've supercharged the speed and the scale of these global connections. This is exactly why Janardhan can have that call center job in the first place.
But, and this is a big but, this incredibly fast, tech-powered connection doesn't come without some major consequences. And honestly, there's a huge, fierce debate raging all over the world about it. Is this whole thing a force for good, or is it just creating a whole new set of problems? Let's dive into the arguments.
Okay, let's start with politics. On one side of the debate, you have people who say globalization really weakens the power of the state. It forces governments to bow to the pressures of a global market, kind of turning them into just another competitor. But on the other hand, some argue that the very same technology gives states more power than ever before, allowing them to collect information and, well, rule more effectively. So does it weaken the state or make it stronger? Yeah, it's complicated.
And the economic debate? It's just as fiery. The advocates for globalization will tell you that it generates more growth for everyone. It lets each country do what it does best, and the whole world benefits. But the critics, they say, hold on a second. They argue that it really only benefits a small, wealthy slice of the population, while leaving the poorest and most vulnerable people even further behind. It really is a classic showdown, economic growth versus social justice.
And that criticism can get even more pointed. I mean, some economists look at this whole system and they don't see a level playing field at all. They see a world so tilted in favor of the rich and powerful nations that they've actually described it as a form of recolonization. That's a really powerful charge, isn't it? Okay, what about culture? This is a big one. There's this genuine fear of what's called cultural homogenization, the idea that eventually we're all just going to be eating the same food, watching the same movies, basically a single dominant Western culture taking over. But then you have the counterargument, which says that's not what happens at all. Instead, this mixing creates what's called cultural heterogenization. New, unique, hybrid cultures pop up, actually making the world more diverse and interesting, not less.
And that fear of uniform culture has a name you've probably heard: McDonaldization. It's this idea that the whole world is trying to buy into one specific version of success, often seen as the dominant American dream, and that this threatens to just erase unique local cultures right off the map.
But it's probably not a zero-sum game. Just because you like a burger doesn't mean you stop loving, say, a masala dosa. And look at this great example. Wearing a pair of blue jeans with a traditional homespun kari kurta. Is that the end of culture? Or is it the creation of something brand new, something unique that's a product of both worlds? I think that's a fascinating way to look at it.
All right, so we've looked at the big ideas, the big debates, but that's all a bit abstract, right? What does this actually look like on the ground, in the real world? Let's zoom in and take a look at one country's really fascinating and, well, turbulent journey with all of this: India.
India's modern story with the global economy really has three major phases. First, during the colonial period, it was basically an exporter of raw materials and an importer of finished goods. Then, after independence, it did a complete 180. It put up walls, this policy of protectionism, to try and build up its own domestic industries. And then, 1991. A huge financial crisis basically forced India's hand, and it began to open its economy up to the world, kicking off the era of globalization we see today.
And that brings us full circle, right back to the personal human level. This quote here: "Oh gosh, an Indian again. Connect me to an American, please." Wow. It's just a really stark reminder of the kind of friction this whole process can create. Because while globalization is creating jobs for people like John or Don, it can also stir up a lot of resentment and fear from people in other parts of the world who feel like their own jobs are on the line.
And all of that friction, it naturally leads to our final chapter here: resistance. Because the story of globalization isn't just about these massive flows moving in one direction, it's also about the powerful pushback against them. This is a truly global conversation, and believe me, it is far from over.
And here's the really ironic part. The resistance to globalization has become a global phenomenon itself. A perfect example is the World Social Forum. It's this massive gathering of activists from all over, and they're united in their opposition to what they call neoliberal globalization. That's the version of it they believe puts corporate profits way ahead of people and the planet.
And this pushback, it's not coming from just one place. It's actually coming from all across the political spectrum. You've got folks on the left who argue it's just making the rich richer and the poor poorer. Then you have groups on the right who are deeply concerned about losing their traditional culture and values. And on top of that, you have very practical opposition from, say, trade unions protesting multinational companies or social movements fighting to keep traditional resources, like the neem tree, from being patented by big corporations.
So we kind of end up right back where we started, staring at a really complex picture. Globalization is, well, it's everywhere. It connects us in ways that create incredible opportunities for some people and very real threats for others. It forces us to wrestle with these enormous questions about power, about money, and about who we are. So is it a threat or is it an opportunity? At the end of the day, the most honest answer is probably that it's unavoidably and powerfully